little bit about your background and tell the folks kind of what your perspective is and where you're coming from and kind of where you've been.
Sure. So I've definitely had a non-traditional path to blockchain, but I will say that that seems to be the most common story when I start to talk to people in blockchain. They weren't as children envisioning a future where they were blockchain people. And so the story personally of how I got here, I was ironically you posted this on LinkedIn about being a data science rock star, a title I definitely want to start to use. First time anybody's used that with us.
I like it.
But I actually wanted to be a real rock star, and I was in a band and was touring the country and had a record deal, and I was on that path, and then it just didn't work out for me, obviously. So the next best option was to become an economist. I went to school, started studying econ. From that, I jumped into data science because data is a big component of being an economist. In fact, a lot of economists led the way when it comes to analytical approaches and methods. And then in the econ courses I was teaching, I started to pay a lot of attention to technology, to emerging technology. And I fell in love with futurism. I didn't know that was a thing at the time, and fell in love with futurism, started to follow a lot of futurists and bring in emerging technology to the classroom. Blockchain was one of those that I've had probably in the classroom since 2013 or 14.
Wow, so you're ahead of the curve there a little bit. It's awesome that you can see that. So how long have you been interested in blockchain and personally?
So about 2 or 3 years ago, I started to get pulled into blockchain first through cryptos who were looking for tokenomics. They were looking for some crypto economics for their governance. And that was really my first exposure. Where I'm here in Salt Lake City, Utah. This is the home of Overstock.com. They were neighbors of ours actually for quite some time until they just moved to their new Peace Coliseum. But Medici Venture is one of the groups that we started to do traditional type data science work for that then morphed into very blockchain specific work.
Awesome. And what is your focus now? What's your background? I know you're the CEO of Imperatos. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now and what you guys offer?
Sure. So Imperatos has two sides right now to it. The first is traditional businesses who aren't using blockchain. They're really early in their data maturity stages. So they're often stuck at human reporting. They don't have real-time flow systems. They don't have any sort of analytics. Maybe don't even have a data science team. And they are looking to start to move through the data maturity stages so they can start to leverage technologies like machine learning or AI. But they're basically at step one of about 100. And those organizations have been the bread and butter for us for many years. That's where we really honed our craft as data scientists. We saw some of the problems that I got excited about blockchain solving are the result of being on the front lines with these companies where we would see they don't have data governance, they don't have access management. And these are problems that blockchain figured out ahead of time. So before quantifying, it thought about these issues. That's very different from the origin story of most data inside enterprises today, which is sprawl. I call it data sprawl. It was not well thought out. It's the difference between going down a street here in Salt Lake City that's based on a grid system and meandering through the roads in Boston, where I was actually born, and seeing the difference between a pre-planned system and a sprawl-based system. And I would say that most of the organizations are Boston. They have data, they don't know where it is, it's not very clear how to get to it. Often it's incomplete or imperfect. And as a result, we started to see blockchain with these companies that were hiring us as a immediate fix for most of these issues.
So how do you see blockchain addressing that issue?
So I think just the way in which it is pre-quantified is very important. It is pre-quantified along a system that everybody understands. The governance is completely clear. Everybody knows how it's going to be quantified, what's going to be captured. There's access to it. It is not centralized. So I can go on to BigQuery and I can get the Ethereum blockchain and I can immediately start to mine it and understand what's going on. If I want to do the same thing for something as simple as Google Analytics inside of an organization, that can take months, involve 5 or 6 meetings. Legal might be involved, IT might be involved, all the stakeholders and decision makers might be involved. They've never gone through the process of consensus to leverage this data. And while that wasn't the original intent of the ledger, it is a wonderful byproduct that actually is what has happened.
Awesome. Not to go too far backwards on you in this conversation here, but I'm going to ask a very obvious question, and I'll kind of lead into a really cool story I think that you've got. But how important is data right now? And do people understand how important it really is and what we have on our hands right now?
So we were joking just before we went live that
Yeah.
the only thing that can confuse people more than data is blockchain data. There is not a lot of maturity right now when it comes to data, and this is a byproduct of the way it's been taught in higher education. As a higher educator, I can tell you that it is not often a course people leave really excited about when you talk about basic statistics or any sort of probability theory. And I think that's because it's largely been driven by mathematicians to this point and not by direct application. That's changed in the last definitely 10 years, but even 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there were some early pioneers, even in the 80s, who really saw the power of a quantified, digitized world. And that's what data represents. In fact, I say this often in presentations I give and classes I teach that data science only matters if you have a really strong commitment to improving the future. There's no use case for it otherwise. If you don't want to make things better by understanding how they are and how they've been and the forces that you're facing against for the future, data science isn't for you. Why do you want to see a wall coming at you? There's no purpose to using data science unless you have that commitment. And I say a really strong commitment because it's not easy currently. It takes a lot of technical skills. There's a big shortage of those specialized skills, but it's also pretty expensive right now. So a data science project can easily cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's been enough failure that that price tag has created some aversion to embracing data, but the future belongs to those who are going to be utilizing data. That's without a doubt. If you just look right now at all the really large, powerful companies, they came into existence recently. They are not old traditional money from the 1800s, 1900s. These are organizations that seemingly came out of nowhere and almost uniformly all use data in that process. And it's gotten to the point that even now enterprises have recognized that this is a vulnerability if they don't get going. And so the last data that I saw from 2015, it was a survey that was done by a consultancy group, a large consultancy group. Its name escapes me at the moment. But they surveyed 1,000 decision makers, high level decision makers, and C-level individuals, and asked them about various things related to their data science programs. And the majority now are actively pursuing data science programs. They recognize it as a huge competitive advantage. In fact, I think the fear of missing out has driven more of the adoption than forward thinking. In the end, it doesn't matter. Everybody's making the transition, which is great, but it has not always been the result of forward thinking. And you go to the organizations, the enterprises who have really succeeded at this point, and you do see that they had a forward thinking strategy. Amazon is by and large the best example of this. For all of his many skills, Jeff Bezos, more than I think anyone in the late 90s, saw the potential of data. And so this is why you saw Amazon pioneering things like recommender engines, why you saw them pioneering things like quantifying the customer journey and optimizing every single point of contact to minimize friction. That's why they ended up with a patent for one-click buying, from looking at data and understanding that flow process. And again, this is why I think blockchain is unique from a data science standpoint. Data science is often like piecing together a video with a bunch of snapshots. So imagine making a feature-length film, The Avengers, using nothing but single frame screenshots, maybe every 20, 30 seconds. You've seen videos like this. They don't have a smooth flow. That's effectively how data science operates right now, because you have the status of a database at one time, the status of a database at another time. Often there's nothing in there to easily track where the changes have resulted from. You might see that changes have happened, but you can't see why. And again, this is where the blockchain for its security protocols really allowed for continuous flow information that just isn't accepted in data science right now. And I don't think most data scientists have embraced this idea of blockchain as a superior solution. So my journey story to Blockchain Training Alliance happened in New Mexico at the Block Fiesta conference. The day before I presented there, I had been in Salt Lake City at a very large big data event. It's been here for many years, but it is growing exponentially here in Utah, which they call the Silicon Slopes now because of how many tech companies we have. And my session was standing room only, people filling the backs, the walls. And I asked who came because the word blockchain was in the title. And 95% of the hands went up. So I think that data scientists are interested in it. They don't understand it very much right now. They definitely don't understand the business use cases, which makes data science projects that embrace a blockchain potentially dangerous. Because if you really don't understand the use case, you can't possibly apply these approaches. But I think the reason of the motivation that should be driving people to do this, to understand blockchain and to merge blockchain with data science, is that we actually already have a decentralized economy. So this is one of the terms that that sort of red flagged me when I first came into the blockchain space, was this term of decentralization. And that's a term that economists have been using for a very long time. And that's because if you look at something like the global economy, if you look at something like the United States economy, one of the immediate features is just how broken apart it is. The fact that we're coordinating across state lines and nationalities and language barriers, and no one is telling us how to do it. We're all learning, we're all playing our role, and that hyper specialization allows for comparative advantage. And comparative advantage is why we have the growth in the economy we have today. And so further decentralization of the information, which is what blockchain represents for data science, is going to be incredibly powerful. And this is going to be the kind of perfect information that economics is built on. So there's this key assumption in economics that you need perfect information. This is how we make rational decisions. It's not that you don't have emotions. It's just that if you have all the information in front of you, you're likely to make the right decision. And that's all that data represents, is a imperfect version or proxy of that perfect information. And so with better information, we can make better decisions. This is how we drive progress. This is how economies grow. This is how living standards rise. And I think that that information is so critical for overcoming the fear, the uncertainty, and the doubt that hits markets and companies and individuals.
Luciano, you said something that really resonated with me, describing kind of the arc of data science and analytics. I see so many parallels with blockchain. In the early days, it was primarily taught by engineers, mathematicians, highly analytical people who maybe failed to tell the human story behind it and get people really excited about it. It was a very ambiguous thing for companies. They didn't know how to apply it. And that there's really only value in applying the technology if you're forward looking and want to make things better. I mean, all of those just align so perfectly to blockchain. It made me wonder, you mentioned at the end that data science has now really exploded. Do you think a lot of the growth and adoption in the corporate space is probably more due to fear of missing out than actual desire to improve anything? But it seems like data science has crossed that line from being something obscure and under the radar to something that at least is starting to go mainstream, and you're starting to hear mentioned a lot more outside of technical and engineering circles. What was that watershed moment like? I mean, was there a certain event or point in time you remember in your mind where you kind of crossed that threshold into the mainstream, or was it more of a gradual transition?
No, there was definitely a fulcrum moment
Mm-hmm.
in that process. I would say, keep in mind, I haven't observed the whole history of data to the present. I know the history from having studied. Really, it was the government's domain till about the 80s. And then what you had in the 80s was the rise of what would become the internet. And so now suddenly you had connectivity. And that connectivity was digital. So the first digital connectivity was audio. It was the first thing to ever be digitized, and that was early in the 1900s. They did not store that data in the same kind of ways that we had to in the late 1900s. And so connectivity was a really big part. The digitization was another part. You have what are called complementary markets in economics. You can't produce all that data and move all that data if you can't store it somewhere and retrieve it from somewhere and have languages and protocols. And so all of that other stuff that's related to extracting the information, so getting the insights out of it, I would say that that's really what picked up in the 80s. So you had connectivity, you had falling prices of computing power, falling prices of storage. Those things accelerated through the late 90s and early 2000s. And I'll just say that I personally noticed the shift sometime in, I'd say 2012 was probably the year. Maybe that's what the Mayan calendar was actually predicting, was of a world where you didn't have data insights. Because what tipped me off was we stopped as a company receiving flat files.
Mhm.
So we weren't getting CSVs anymore. Now we were getting access to databases directly. And then we were getting access to APIs because a lot of those databases were tied to SaaS programs. So they were on the cloud. They weren't on a premise. And then there was a different way to access them. And then the internet speed just kept going up and up and up. And the computing processing power went up exponentially over the costs. And all of that led to a perfect mix, the perfect storm where you could have an individual halfway across the world from the company they're working from who in real time is mining things and sending them back information. And so that study that I had referenced before, again, I cannot remember the consultancy group who did it, but it was called Big and Fast Data. And one of the things that they realized is the motivation from the business side to adopt blockchain and to adopt data science is because they want more real-time information. So they've already bought into the idea that the value is there, and it is clearly there. The companies that are using data they're killing it.
Mm-hmm.
But now it was it's just like a race. Well, who can get to the answer faster? And once you had these like massive processing problems that were often not solved the traditional way, they weren't solved from government grants, they weren't solved by hiring academics. They were solved by a 15 or 16-year-old who watched videos online, figured out that they could do it better, and had the audacity to try, and then was able to share that message with the rest of the world. And so I'd say it was probably 2012 where that really hit a tipping point.
Interesting. Yeah, it's exciting personally to hear all that because I feel like we're getting close to that with blockchain. And as these two technologies, data science and blockchain, intersect, the fact that they're both still so relatively new to the business and the marketplace, it's just really exciting. I'm sure, as you know, it can be frustrating at times too because we're really blazing the trail. There's not a precedent or a set of standards to follow, but for folks who are excited by that and find that kind of work interesting, these are just two incredible fields to be getting involved in right now.
Absolutely. And Luciano, there's a last time I heard you speak, there was something you were talking about, and I want to kind of get to that real quick because a lot of times we're talking to program managers that aren't actually hands on with the IT anymore. They have full teams that are hands on with this stuff, and right now they're contacting us out of Chris mentioned FOMO, like the fear of missing out right now. Can you break down on a very basic level? And I've heard you do this a little bit in your last talk where we met you. What blockchain does for data scientists and what it does for data in general. And you talked about, I forget what the numbers were, but how much time a data scientist actually spends cleansing the information just to
Yeah.
be able to analyze it. Can you go through that a little bit for me so that a middle tier manager can understand that?
Yeah, so there's really three places where blockchain adds a level of exponential improvement over existing data storage, so databasing type solutions. The first is the trustworthiness, and this gets back to what I said earlier about there has been a pre-definition of how things will be quantified, and it's being left up to machines to record that. And so you remove a lot of human error from it. And so if I'm a data scientist and I'm looking at something like the Ethereum ledger versus something like someone's Google Analytics versus something like an Excel sheet that they've manually imputed, there's a spectrum there of human error. And I think this is one of the places where humans show just how little they appreciate the power of data, because there's always this assumption that the computer is only going to perform, if the computer is going to perform better using data, it will only be marginally better. And that has not been the result of things like self-driving cars or medical assessments, so diagnoses, or discovery for court cases. Every time a machine goes up against a human on a very narrow task, the human gets murdered. Just, it's not even funny to the level where so another one that I saw this recently was handwriting. So you had people who were doing handwriting algorithms and then they were doing them in multiple languages. and they were giving the same sample of writing to trained professionals. These are people who have spent their entire lives studying handwriting and studying the language that handwriting is written in. And in the past, you would give it to someone like this, a centralized expert, and you'd say, tell us everything about this handwriting. And now you give it to a computer instead, and the computer performs so well that the handwriting experts themselves sort of just threw in the towel. And those moments are happening more and more with data. They're like a light bulb moment that will happen. If you get one of those moments in an organization, that's when I think you can christen yourselves as a data-driven organization. When you've accomplished that first big win, quick win usually, but the first big win after that, it's easy to get buy-in for data science because it's clear what can be done. But there's this sort of, I don't want to use the term prejudice because it's not really, doesn't really apply to, I don't know how it applies to a machine. But there is this sense that a human won't be that far behind a machine if it even happens. And that just doesn't, it just isn't the case.
Fear of the unknown.
Yeah, and so the trustworthiness of the data is one big component. The human error is gone. Again, we know how it came into existence. The origin story of the data is really clear because we know the governance. We can see the governance in code itself to know how it was created. I mentioned also the continuity, the fact that over time, so you can follow the life cycle. This is something that we've been doing is you just randomly grab a Bitcoin or any token, and in its ledger, you can see its life cycle. You can see how it came into existence, every single wallet that it's ever exchanged, presence in, how those networks and how the timing of that is all affecting it. You just can't do that with problems as a business right now using traditional databases, using a SQL database or even a non-relational database. That kind of flow continuous process is very hard. Like I said, in the past, it's just been a series of snapshots. In fact, economists called them comparative statics. That's what a big part of econ used to be, was doing those math-based graph comparisons. Okay, we change demand by this much, what happens to the market? Well, you can watch the change in a ledger. You can only predict the change using snapshots and then validate after the fact, was it correct or not? And this gets to the last part, which is the completeness. This just represents a different level of completeness than most data scientists are used to. And so, Chad, you had brought up the stat that I threw out in that presentation, which was 50%. So most data scientists that I know, personal friends, we've also done some survey work about this with data scientists here at Imperatus. They spend at least 50% of their time just prepping to start the analysis. So their real value add is not the prepping of data. It's the building of models and understanding the output and getting that into the hands of decision makers. But 50%, and I had another data scientist who told me offhand after that presentation that he thinks it's probably more like 80. And I think he's probably right. For some people, it probably is more like 80% of their time is just getting ready to do it. And that's because you can't trust the data. You don't understand it. It's not continuous. So you have to construct things from different versions of the database. There's a lot of ETL work that has to go into it. And it's not complete. It's got a lot of holes and you might not understand what's going on. And so blockchain changes those three fundamental things about the underlying data. And any model, the models are a commodity at this point. So again, it's 19-year-old, 20-year-old kids with computers who are figuring out ever better ways to do data science. And then if they're smart about it and they're putting it out there, then they're getting these huge jobs at giant tech companies. And the delay of getting that kind of updated information about what modeling approach is best is shaved down to days at this point. People post stuff on Twitter and it spreads like wildfire. It used to be months, if not years, if not decades in traditional learning approaches. So, you think about the life cycle of an academic. They would study for 20 to 30 years to become an expert, prove themselves through their dissertation, go into their field, work for a decade, start to publish. Maybe a decade later, they get a textbook deal. It's been 40, 50 years at this point that the world is now just on a mass level understanding how they approached modeling. Now it's down to, like I said, days. Someone can do something, put it up on GitHub, and everybody else has access to it immediately. And so the models themselves are a commodity. What matters is the type of data and the quality of that data, whether it's trustworthy and continuous.
Yeah, that's absolutely staggering to me to stop and think about the ramifications of, I don't care if you're into data science, blockchain, or anything else. If you imagine, 50+% of your time being spent just getting ready to do the part of your job where you add value, and then you remove that, and get that, approaching 100%. That's just incredible when you stop and think about that.
Yeah, and this gets to one of my futurist kind of beliefs, which is I don't think that the rise of automation, which is what data science models using something like a superior database system like blockchain would accomplish, I don't think that mass automation is going to make the world, the future world, a worse off place. It's going to make it a much better off place. There's been a long tradition of fearing technologies when they emerge. And this, from bicycles to the railroad to chlorinated water, and sometimes some of those fears were true. There were negative things. It's not often the case that something is just positive. It's got positive and negatives. Economists talk about their externalities, the unintended consequences, all the time. But on the whole, these technologies seem to consistently make the world better. And I don't doubt that AI and blockchain have that same potential. But what I do, just for this is my personal belief, I don't think that it makes humans completely redundant or obsolete. I think that, hey, if the machine can automate 99% of the process and that last 1% is a human looking at it and then giving their opinion, that's where I've seen the breakthrough moments with data science, is the interpretation of all that complex information that has been processed using high technology. In the end, you got to explain it to someone who needs it at a 8-year-old, 10-year-old level, because they don't have familiarity. It's not that they're dumb. They don't have familiarity with all the other things that went into creating it and understanding it. They just need to know how it directly applies to what they're doing. And a human still seems much better at that than a machine. Maybe I'll eat my words one day, but I think that the human capacity for creativity is what drives that. And machines aren't really creative. They're programmed.
Absolutely, yeah. It's. I share your optimism for the future. I think we're probably in the minority, but I always like to joke. I'm one of the few people looking forward to Skynet. Go ahead and bring it on.
That's right.
That's why you're polite to Alexa, correct?
Exactly.
I'm more afraid of people controlling Skynet than Skynet itself.
Exactly.
The centralized fear of the power, because this is another fact of economics, is you centralize power and you attract the worst possible characters to that power because the incentive for them, the payoff for them relatively, is much higher. And that's what motivates human behavior. And so it's not, I don't fear a robot army. I fear a robot army at the disposal of a single individual, because history has shown that some pretty negative stuff can happen that way. We haven't seen an example where the robots were distributed and collecting all this information and acting in a decentralized fashion. We haven't seen that.
There's a new movie.
Yeah.
There we go. We're gonna produce that one. I like that. Luciano, so that kind of brings me. I like I like talking about the future here a little bit. We have a class that we're putting together, a futures class that we've been working with you on as well for one of the big four, and they're really kind of interested in a wide variety of topics. But as we've been going through it, it's been really exciting for me to see the connectivity. We've talked about 5G, how that then relates to storage in the cloud, and then blockchain for the storage of the data, and then moving all the way through to AI and automation. Can you go through kind of how those technologies all connect together, and then what that might look like in 5 or 10 years from now? Maybe predict the future a little bit in your crystal ball if you had no judgment here from anybody.
I did one of the, I didn't do it. I should be honest. It was someone in my family who did like an ancestry type thing.
Uh-huh.
And they found somewhere not very far back on my father's Italian side a fortune teller, a crystal ball fortune teller in
Great.
Italy. And I got the text message from my brother at the time as I was sitting in an econometrics class. And I thought to myself, how ironic that I am doing effectively the same thing, but with math instead of a crystal ball.
Hey, yeah, we'll get
There
you a
is
crystal
no
ball.
there is no more certainty, by the way, in my opinion, to the mathematics approach on any one thing. On the whole, absolutely, it is better. But when you talk about any one thing predicting the future, it gets very difficult. This has been the tension with futurism and economists as well, right? That they've successfully predicted the last nine of the five. I think that's the phrase. They've successfully predicted the last nine of the last five recessions. They just keep going out there and screaming that the sky is falling, and eventually they get it right. And so I will put a little asterisk on my prediction that I think that the next 5 years and then the five after that are going to be an acceleration of change that's just not, it's going to even hit people's current comfort limits. So we're so desensitized to the idea of change because we're so used to it. But if you start to talk to people who lived quite a long time ago and who are at the end of their life and you ask them about, the stages of their life, the last stage has been very shocking to them because of the nature of the change. And we're just on that path right now of accelerated change. And so the technologies, the think about it like a flow, a signal flow. So you have two different people across the world. They want to communicate. It has to be digital because we don't know of a physical way to move that far, right? The human voice can at most on a good day a mile be heard away. If they're shouting at screaming at your lungs, you're going to be heard maybe a mile away. But we can communicate real time right now across the world because there is a flow, there's a digital flow between us. And the speed of that flow is what 5G represents. So the speed and the bandwidth of that speed, 5G is just a different level. Right now we have hit a bottleneck. And you've experienced it probably yourself personally when you've waited for a video to load or you've waited for something to upload to Google Drive or the cloud. You can't always do exactly what you want to do at that instant. And then you have in that flow the ability to capture. So you create the data on one side, you capture it on the other. You can also capture it on the side that it was created if you want. And that's what the blockchain represents in this process. Is you can have the data stored in a form with the flow built on top of it where everything's very consistent, everything's continuous, everything is very trustworthy and complete. And then you have to get out of it, out of that information, so that blockchain information about that exchange between two individuals. Could be the sending of a file, could be the sending of a token, could be sharing of medical records, could be the movement of a piece of gold across the upstream and downstream part of the gold supply chain. Then you have the last part, which is insights. And ironically, precious metals are so key to this, the processing power inside of a computer.
Mm-hmm.
You have to extract from that blockchain often through the process of a flow because you're often either pulling it from somewhere or might even be in real time coming to you. You then have to transform it into information that humans can understand. And this is where data science comes in. And there's often some confusion about machine learning and AI. Really, AI is about the application of what would have been human processes, in my opinion. Searching through different x-rays to figure out whether somebody has cancer or not. Looking at samples of a microscope image to see if there's a rise, like potential for bacteria. Maybe you don't have to chlorinate the water if the water isn't actually dirty. And maybe you could learn that by just taking a snapshot in a pipe every few seconds and then running that through a machine learning algorithm that learns what the bacteria is like and then automates things like treatment processes. So that's where the AI takes the next step, right? The machine learning is just about continual model improvement. New information in, model updates, new process out. But when you start to talk about the transition into AI, which is the pinnacle right now of the insights part of this process, you're really talking about acting, so proscriptive actions built on the predictive output.
So cool.
Yeah,
So
that's
cool. So, Luciano, I'm curious because I'm sure you get this question a lot too. This is one that seems to come up a lot in blockchain, and it's, I think, a classic example of one of those "how long is a piece of string" questions. But we get asked all the time. Pick your vertical. How can blockchain be used to solve supply chain issues? How can blockchain be applied to digital rights management? How can blockchain address issues in healthcare? So I'm just kind of curious. do you get a lot of those questions in data science, and how do you approach that? Because really, these are all questions that we can't begin to address until we get a little bit more information.
So I think because this is a new problem, we have to look at other examples to offer a potential solution, and we should know it might change based on the fact that it's blockchain related. But one of my colleagues, a data scientist who's here in Utah, who is the chief algorithm officer of a company called Ziff, ZIFF, they're an AI company here in Utah. They have a really good series of either podcasts or webinars that they were on where they really outlined how they prioritize what he called science projects. There's stuff that's really cool. That sounds really cool. You're like, we should do that. That is so cool. And everybody in the room is nodding like, that would be really cool. That's not the measure by which these things should be assessed. The cost of failure is still too high right now. And so you really have to prioritize based on ROI. What is going to be the organizational impact of this? Mm-hmm. So what you have to start to look at, again, if the values of blockchain and data science are that it's trustworthy, it's continuous, and it's complete, then you look for situations where incomplete data has a really bad outcome, like medical record sharing. Or you look at something like where trustworthiness is really important, like often supply chain. You might think you're getting something, you might not actually. Right now, Amazon, despite all of their power with AI, keep in mind that Amazon pioneered data to the point that they built so many resources for themselves that they spun off the excess capacity into AWS, which is now a multi-billion-dollar enterprise for them, and is one of the best built systems I've ever seen. That was just their excess capacity, and they still can't figure out when a bag is necessarily fraudulent or not. Now, do you care so much about, you might financially care more about the bag on a moment by moment assessment because it costs you a lot of money, but I think long term you care far more about getting incomplete medical records which lead to a bad diagnosis or a prescription drug issue, or they amputate the wrong limb. These are things that happen currently at surprisingly high numbers per year just in the United States. So if you look at those places, it's easy to start to prioritize away the science projects to the things that are going to have real impact. Personally, I think supply chain is a very interesting one. I'm still quite torn on the quantification component. How do you really ensure that the thing that you assign a token to is what it was said it was at the first moment and then stays that way throughout? There's an incentive there to just break that connection. And so trustworthiness still doesn't go away completely with blockchain, but it's a vast improvement over everything else that currently exists. Huge improvement. And this gets to the motivation of, I think, data science in general and understanding, like, why would you care about understanding emerging technology? Again, unless you want to make the world a better place in the future, which means you have to make better profitable decisions. You can't waste things. You got to eliminate scarcity by being innovative and creating new technologies. You have to distribute it better. All those things result in growth, and it's because they ultimately all start to save time. People care about the medical record because it ends their life. It cuts off their time. People care about the purse because they spent time earning the money to get something that didn't turn out to be what they wanted. So if you start to trace time and people's allocation of their personal time, I think you can start to prioritize the scope of these different projects and where it makes sense to start to apply blockchain. But is it?
Sorry, go ahead.
Please go ahead.
No, do you have a specific use case that you're following or working on that can kind of connect these ideas?
Sure. So I'll give you a very concrete example. So I am part of a group that is working on one of the first full reserve banks to exist in the world in hundreds of years. If everything is successful, it will be happening in Wyoming. I posted to my LinkedIn yesterday a link to what the legislature there is considering. But part of what they want to understand, this is a blockchain-based bank that is targeting primarily other cryptos or other blockchains that need banking services. And a big issue is the regulation around know your customer, so the KYC AML, right? Know your customer, anti-money laundering. You don't want to facilitate human trafficking and terrorism and organized crime or fraud. You don't want to facilitate that. So how can you ensure that in that whole supply, the financial supply chain now, where money is moving around, how do you ensure that the people who you're doing business with are who they say they are and are doing what they say they're doing? And so what we have been doing right now is graph database analysis, so network analysis. So one of the unique features about a blockchain is that you have a many-to-many relationship or a one-to-many relationship. You have all of these connections that can take any form. It can be people sending themselves to different wallets. It can be wallets exchanging with different individuals. Those individuals can be nation states or pools or different organizations. And so how do you use all of that really perfect data? Every transaction that's ever happened is in there. So how do you use all of that information from a network standpoint? So we have been using Neo4j is one of the tools that we've been using. BigQuery. So Google's BigQuery, the 170 gigabyte file of the entire Ethereum blockchain is there. Or you can just cut it off to the last beginning of January 2019. It's about 1 million rows of transactions. But if you want to get the entire thing, BigQuery will let you very easily. It's 170 gigabytes. Okay, the first computer had 5 megabytes. That was the limitation. So this would have been financially impossible to do 60 years ago, 70 years ago. The price of that storage was infinite. Well, the price has plummeted to zero. And in a zero price economy, which is where I think we're actually headed in the future, things like the size of a database aren't the limitation anymore. Now it's how do you extract information using graph-based analysis. So we know we want to look at relationships. That's important. What are the nodes? Are they individuals? Are they transactions? Are they wallets? What are the relationships between them? Is it the transaction? Is it the amount? Is it the amount of gas? Is it the amount? Is it their place in the blockchain, in the ledger, their position? We can start to explore what has been going on across this very large ecosystem, which I do think is correct to call this a little mini economy. So it's one of the languages that pulled me into blockchain early on, was people referring to this as a mini economy. It's absolutely true. It really is. And so in the case of the free range bank, using things like Google's BigQuery and Neo4j, Dendrite's another one we've looked at, R and Python are tools we use, Hadoop is a tool that's very useful for that size of a data file and to do distributed processing. Tableau or Power BI to do visualizations. There's a Slack to do automatic messaging when things are done or if models have run and retrained. All of those various tools, many of which are open source, by the way, and free. Many of those things make it very easy to, or at least possible, maybe I shouldn't say the word easy, it's not been easy, but it makes it possible to look at something like the ledger and say, we think that this is a terrorist. We think that this is an organized criminal who might even be engaging in human trafficking because this pattern shows up here. Doesn't mean that it's absolutely correct. We've got to be worried about false negatives and false positives. But this is at least something to examine. And so if you've followed US tech history in the last 20 years, there is a group called the PayPal Mafia. And Chris, I think I saw a video of you, one of your driving videos where you might have talked about the PayPal Mafia. Maybe
Yeah, early last year. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a super interesting group. It's the people behind LinkedIn and PayPal and, well, obviously PayPal. Palantir is what I meant to say, with Peter Thiel. And you've got Elon Musk with his 24 companies. All of that has been funded with money that came from PayPal. And Palantir itself is a commercial spinoff of the anti-fraud algorithm that PayPal created when they started to do things like on eBay. Because in traditional financial exchange, if you use a credit card, there's the possibility for a chargeback. So if the equipment that you purchased turns out to be stolen, that can be charged back to the original person who paid, didn't lose their stuff. Or if it's a fraudulent transaction, like the card was stolen, then that money can be reversed. That's very hard in an immutable world, which is the blockchain. And so how do you, in PayPal's case, it was an easier problem to solve, but their question was, how do you identify that a transaction should or should not go through before they put it into their process? And what they discovered was it was a mix of an algorithm, so a computer that would look through things and say, this looks like it might be fraudulent, and then a human who would go and investigate it. And through that combination, they built not only the success of PayPal, but then Palantir, which is a very large data science organization that Peter Thiel's a part of. And it's because of that mix, which is the same exact mix that we're applying with free range bank. A machine, an algorithm, machine learning driven, graph analysis based approach at looking at transactions and wallets and public information to say this looks like it could be an issue, and then proactively through humans assessing if it really is or not. And then giving that information, by the way, back to the system. Yes, you were right. No, you were wrong. Because that's how the algorithm then improves.
Very interesting. Yeah, great stuff. I think just kind of looking at where we're coming from and we're teaching these emerging techs, there's definitely a fear of the unknown. And I'd say like even with our government sometimes, especially when they seem to be a little bit, a few people think even further behind than they probably are. But I think it could be exciting for them to look at these new options for them to rather than shun these new economies or these token economies, utilize them to actually for good to track things that should be tracked, and it provides that information for them. Have you had any, or do you know of that you can speak about without repercussions? Any government programs, are they open to these ideas?
Yeah, I think that the federal government through DARPA, well, let's talk about just the US. So the
Yeah.
US federal government through DARPA and through other organizations like InQtel or Lab 41, these groups that are uh, on the spear point of advancing technology for the purpose of security. I think they are very interested, and I think they're also very good at what they're doing. They're one of the success cases of using data for a very long time. I think that in general, the government in the United States is falling behind other nations. That's the assessment that I've heard from people who are inside of different agencies, that the US is not, it's not holding its place that it used to when it comes to things like machine learning and AI. Um, some of that's partially skewed because they look at things like total number of projects, not necessarily how successful the projects are. But I do think that most of the government is totally blind to this. I think citizenship should be on the blockchain. I think that voting should happen through the blockchain. I'm very excited about Medici Ventures and what they're doing. I don't see why we should have financial institutions that aren't on the blockchain at this point. That's immediately one of the highest value return on investment places is anything financial. Just because, again, the trustworthiness and the completeness is so key to the success and the well-being. Economists call it rightfully, call the financial sector the vascular system of the body. It's how everything moves around. So if it fails, the body, the economy's body dies. And so it's a good place to apply a lot of these new technologies. I think the problem with government is it's just kind of slow. And that's also something that seems to be changing. But the private sector is definitely leading the way right now when it comes to the adoption of what I think are really interesting and powerful use cases that will then demonstrate success, and then the government will jump on real fast.
Amazing. What are some interesting use cases for the folks out there watching? And we'll put some links when we post this in different places. But what are some interesting use cases that folks should check out that get you excited about some people doing great work in these spaces?
So one that, and for disclosure, I worked on this. I worked directly on the tokenomics for this. In fact, they'll be putting it up on their website soon. One is Keras Chain. So they are a gold supply compliance software tool that's going to use blockchain to track with physical hardware all from the moment of exploration and mining all the way from the upstream to downstream through the supply chain, which is mostly resulting in jewelry, but electronics are climbing rapidly in that as a demand of precious metals. And their solution is really built around precious metals, so gold, silver, and the platinum group. I think that's one that's really exciting. Obviously, free range bank, I wouldn't be involved with that one if I didn't think that a full reserve bank built on the blockchain wasn't a pretty awesome thing to be a part of right now. Outside of stuff that either I'm working on or I've already mentioned, T0 is a good one with Medici Ventures. As far as there's other complementary goods that are not necessarily they're not the token itself or the blockchain itself, but they relate to it. Two that I have been watching that I'm pretty interested in are Block Science in San Francisco. I think that their founder, I think his name is Michael. I saw a video of him talking about the ways in which data science can be applied to blockchain and to cryptocurrencies and other tokenized assets. I think that his approach, he's a systems optimizer, so he is an engineer. But as an engineer, my understanding is he optimized complex systems. And those complex systems are basically like an economy. So all the methods that he realized about data collection and modeling and simulation, that's the other one. We haven't even talked about simulation. The real future of data science is not going to end with AI. It's going to be simulation. It's okay, now the AI understands everything. Let's do those comparative statics like economists used to with a simple supply and demand chart. Let's do it for the entire economy and see where we hit the wall and see when things are at critical mass and how we can avoid that, or where we're missing opportunities and we should be pushing harder maybe into space to get a hold of asteroids because the return there is so high. I think that he's got a good vision. Another is a group in Boston. I am blanking on their name at the moment. Prism Group. So they really handle the governance. So they have two female founders, both of which I think were at Harvard, one of which is tied to the crypto lab there at MIT. I think they're doing pretty cool things when it comes to governance. That is much bigger problem. Governance is a much bigger problem than anyone thinks it is, because it's basically like trying to predict the future of human behavior around incentives. And their specialization, they came from a contract theory background in economics. And a fact of contract theory is they're always incomplete. No contract is perfect. So immutability might be an issue down the road. But I think that they're doing some pretty cool stuff. They've got some high-level advisors, and it's all around governance. And then I think the real breakthrough is going to come from a company that solves the technological limitation of the power usage. So anything can be more efficient. And definitely the starting situation that we had with cryptocurrencies as a first real successful use case of blockchain showed the potential for just massive consumption. I mean, if you were an alien species looking at Earth from space and you were tracking energy flows as a way of determining the sophistication of the system, Bitcoin should pop right out at you because it's the biggest computer network in the world that we know of. And the number of transactions that are happening in real time and the way in which it's connecting everyone, it would pop out as one of the main features of human society right now, in also part because of how much electricity it uses. And so if we can solve that problem when it comes to things like proof of work or proof of stake, or I've seen lots of alternative approaches, I think that's going to be a real tipping point moment for this. And I don't know that company exists yet. But if they're out there and they're listening, get a hold of me because I'd love to talk to them about what they're doing.
Well, so that kind of brings me to my next point then. How does somebody get a hold of you or find you and get more information and reach out to you?
Well, if this topic was interesting, the first thing they should do is go sign up for the blockchain data science course that I'll be teaching through Blockchain Training Alliance here in the coming months. An alternative is to just go to imperatos.com and get a hold of us there. My email is just Luciano, Luciano at imperatos.com. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on Twitter, so you can find me on social media there as well. And I do love to answer questions. And I've got a lot of material and sources that I love to share just because of the courses that I teach at university. And more than anything, I just want to see this technology mature, because that is probably the most exciting part about this whole story is, the product life cycle is a framework that economists use to assess how long a product's going to live. And there's nothing that says that a product is going to have X amount of years. If you look at something like Coca-Cola, it's been around for 100 plus years. It's changed minor parts of its recipe, but it's been around for a very long time. There are other products that just come and go. The example I think I gave at the presentation, Chad, where we met, was the shake weight.
Mm-hmm.
So if people remember, that is a product that just came out of nowhere, was all the rage for a little while. It got pop culture references, and then it just disappeared. So why is one life cycle so different than the other? I don't know which one blockchain is going to be. It could be something that comes along. It could be like the mini disk, right? This great promising idea. But it turns out that there's one version down the road that's even better, and that's what we'll all move to quickly. I don't think so. I think that this is going to have fundamental value for a very long time. But we're at the day one of the product life cycle, right? We're at the development introduction phase. We haven't even hit mass growth. We haven't hit mass adoption. It's, early adopters who are really passionate about the idea of something like decentralization or cryptography or being able to globalize and get around arbitrary systems of centralization that stand in the way at the moment, whether that's accessing data or voting.
Yeah, it's just a fascinating time to be getting involved in any of these technologies. And I share your optimism. Hopefully, neither of these technologies are shake weights. I don't think they are either. But some amazing stuff. It was funny hearing you talk about handwriting recognition. My very first job out of school was with a small company that did data imaging and report retention products for banks. And we used to sell our paperless solutions based on two main feature sets, OCR and ICR. OCR being the ability for a machine to read type print, and
Yeah,
the
optical
accuracies.
character recognition, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and then ICR, intelligent character recognition, trying to read handwriting. That was always more of just a sales pitch than an actual useful feature. We'd brag that we could get up to 75, 80% accuracy, which sounds great until you think about, one out of every four or five letters being wrong in a block of text. That gets annoying really quick. But to hear that in 20 short years, it has gone from that low level of accuracy to now exceeding what human beings are able to do. The first thing I thought of was the Google Home or the Amazon Alexa I've got sitting in my office, which you can have very short, stilted, rudimentary conversations with. But in 20 years, is that machine able to carry on a more fluent and cohesive conversation than human beings? It's just fascinating. And data is certainly a huge underpinning of all that.
Yeah, I will talk about this example in the emerging tech course, which is another different course than the blockchain data science that I mentioned. But I have used for a very long time a scheduling assistant named Amy. And Amy is the product of a company in New York. The founder, Dennis, is a great guy, really passionate about machine learning, but also about this is a really good example, in my opinion, of actual AI. It's how do you CC somebody on an email and then have that somebody be a machine that then takes care of everything and gets the entire thing scheduled. And it's actually a really complex problem. It involves a lot of natural language processing because you have a lot of unstructured data. And they have made leaps and bounds in the last few years when it comes to the quality. But when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong. And people and the saving grace, because I always use it to schedule for students for office hours, because there's so many people who will ask me for office hours, but they have no actual intention of really showing up or even going through with scheduling it. They maybe are worried about something at the moment, or they just hit me up and they say, "Can I meet?" And so I always send them to Amy. Sure, Amy will get it set up for you. And if they get to the point where they actually schedule the office hours, and I have it with them. But every so often, Amy will get it so wrong that when I get to one of these office hours with a student, the first thing they say to me is, "You got to fire Amy. She's terrible. What? Why do you use this person?" And then I say, "Oh, it's not a person, it's a machine." And then their mind is they just stop, and there's just a moment of reflection that they've been having a conversation with a machine the whole time, and then they're just amazed.
That's
And
amazing.
that's an example of a success moment. And there are very few of them. Amy is a very rare exception right now of that successful application of data science. And I think blockchain will make success more possible. It will improve the odds. There's nothing about blockchain that would make it worse off, in my opinion. There are things that will improve the quality because Amy will be able to look at all communication across the whole blockchain, potentially not just the little part that I gave her access to in my Gmail inbox.
Absolutely. I think the analogy you mentioned of the film versus just seeing the slideshow really hit the nail on the head for me, because that's something that comes up continually in our blockchain classes is, hey, what is the real value add of blockchain against the database? All these use cases you're talking about, we could do a lot of these with the database. Why bring in the blockchain? And I think that just is another great response to that question. Is it makes the data and the insights you get from it so much more real and three-dimensional and lifelike versus just watching that slideshow.
Yeah, the continuity part is going to be really powerful. And I'm guessing part of that is probably just the nature of who's coming to most of the courses right now. I still feel like blockchain is perceived as being within the domain of IT. And I think that if you look at the history of data governance as a discipline itself, as a component that organizations have to solve to effectively move through data maturity and become a data driven organization, one of the issues is that to date, most of the design has been the result of guardians, people who are really worried about security and secondarily worried about backups, but not necessarily worried about strategic use. And I think, again, one of those tipping point things or that watershed thing in the early, like 2012, was that you now had the decision being driven, at least in part, by end users, by people who now had a use case. And I think the success of these projects, data science projects, often having observed so many of them, including ones that have failed miserably, one of the indicators of success is just how well the end users, these are decision makers and stakeholders and analysts and data scientists, how well they explain the purpose to the IT team to get buy-in. Because the IT team has had decades of being conditioned to ignore bad requests. And once I don't want to stereotype, I used to very badly, I think, stereotype some of my own IT friends for their unwillingness to move on things. But I think that as the organization has become better at explaining the purpose, once it's clear, they jump right on. They're not holding the line because they don't see a future or they don't believe in a better future, or they're not willing to participate in a better future. They just have a hard time understanding how it's going to be done. And as a result, they're used to, first and foremost, securing it and protecting it. And so as soon as the use case becomes really clear from the decision maker side or the stakeholder side, IT comes around very quickly, and then these things succeed.
I couldn't agree 1,000% more. I mean, one of the biggest points I always try and make to folks looking at blockchain is, yes, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for developers and engineers. There's even more opportunity for non-technical people. So get this preconception out of your mind that you have to be a coder or a very technical, highly analytical person to get involved in emerging tech. It's just absolutely not true. The most important person on your team is not the developer or the engineer. It is the storyteller, and it's nice to hear you feel the same way.
And it's one of the reasons I'm excited to be working with you guys.
Awesome. Hey, let me not to switch over topics here real quick, but we like to usually do one question that we take from somebody watching or somebody on one of our networks here, platforms. I think this kind of hits a couple topics we've touched on a little bit, but I think there's some things that probably should be addressed in this question. And Chris, you can pull another question over there as well. But Paolo, who's actually been certified with us, we've been working with him quite a bit. He asked a great question. Blockchain is amazing, but data science and deep learning can be serious threats to privacy when applied to this technology. What will a blockchain-based world look like if everyone's privacy is at risk? Where you guys want to jump in and kind of provide some insight? But I'll repeat the last part again. But what will a blockchain-based world look like if everyone's privacy is at risk?
Boy, I could talk on this for a lot. This is all just my opinion, so please take it at that. But I think we have to look at how much privacy have we ever had. I think in a lot of times when privacy comes into the conversation, we're mourning the loss of something we never had to begin with. Before there was the Facebook and everybody connected in the digital world, people would still talk about you behind your back at the grocery store, the barber shop. So, I don't know that privacy has really changed quantitatively. It's just changed qualitatively. I also think that let's not assume that blockchain, big data, any technology either enhances or detracts from privacy. Let's look at the use case, because the technology itself is going to be fairly agnostic, in my opinion. It's really how the humans apply it. But I would love to hear Luciano's thoughts on that.
So I have a pretty contrary view to most people that I think are in blockchain, because there's a very libertarian motivation behind privacy concerns often when it comes to the people who are early adopters or believers in blockchain. And while I fully understand, sympathize, and in some ways agree with those, I think that you nailed it. How much privacy do you really think you even have? So one of the things that I do every semester to my students, the first day of class, because I have an amazing TA, and we will do background checks just using public information. We're not paying for anything. We're not doing anything. And we find out so much personal information about these people that I'll come into the classroom. Literally the first day I'll walk up to the podium, and as I'm setting stuff up, I'll look down front and I'll see somebody. I'll be like, oh, hi, Che. And there is just a moment of slight fear and shock that I know their name. Then I ask him something that I read about on Facebook on his page, or something that he was tweeting about, or something that I know from other sources he's doing. And there's a moment there where it does escalate. It's a creepy factor, basically. And but at the end of the semester, consistent feedback that I get from students is I liked that he knew who we were day one. In part because I enforce participation. So there is a belief that enforcement is fair simply because I know who people are. And I feel like the real value from blockchain comes from control, not from privacy. And I totally sympathize. This is definitely a result of growing up in a stable and roughly stable political system, roughly stable financial system. When those things fall apart, privacy becomes not just a necessity, but can be the difference between life and death. And so I understand that my current situation shapes my thinking on this. But I do believe that in the end, no matter what, the value from something like blockchain and the power of control has to be backed up by a willingness to just be transparent and to just participate. And I think that the way to motivate that is through opt-in. Just let people have that option. You can stay anonymous, and it changes the governance that applies to you. But if you're going to participate at full level, then this is what it means. And part of that, like with the bank, is KYC AML. You're gonna have to answer some questions for us. You're gonna have to open up about who we are, about who you are. And as long as that system is fair, I think in the end people turn out to like it. But there is a lot of initial fear when the first time that I tell somebody that I know that they don't like to ban the marshmallows.
Yeah, I think Chris, you talk about this. I think just blockchain isn't the only answer. It's not the answer to all our problems. But if it can incrementally make things better than what we currently have, then why isn't it something that absolutely has to be pursued? And I think you touched on that in class, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's important, not to assume that the technology enhances or detracts either way. But if what you're concerned about is privacy, then I think you have to stop and analyze. Okay, what are the current risks to privacy? What are the problems that prevent us from having the level of privacy we have? And once we've identified those problems, then we can go back at the technologies and say, hey, does big data, does analytics, does AI, does blockchain do they make this worse? Do they make it better? Can they do both depending on the circumstance? Is technology, really the central point or not? Kind of back to the same question I asked Luciano earlier that we get all the time. Hey, how can I use blockchain for XYZ, for oil and gas, for human resources? Well, first off, don't assume that blockchain is the answer. Identify what the problem you want to solve is, and then back into does blockchain fit that or not. Otherwise you have a very good chance of applying the wrong tool to the right problem.
forcing the fit.
Yeah, I think part of the discussion that gets left out, and this I think is I'm aware of this just because in economics, when you do things like a cost benefit analysis, it's often easy to count up, say, the people that die as a result of a self-driving car going wrong and hitting somebody. It's a lot harder to count up all the people who lived as a result of a self-driving car because you don't have that same necessary outcome. You don't have measurement on it. And I think that a lot of the things that people fear about when it comes to privacy are at least enabled by the fact that the predation that they fear is going to happen in secret. And so, again, one of the benefits of a blockchain is that if you do start to make this stuff public and transparent, you can't necessarily be picked off one at a time in secret because it's obvious and it's right there in front of everybody. And that's another benefit of this data is that's a way of looking at the world that you don't right now we don't have a way of quantifying successfully. It's very hard. Same this shows up with medicine. So the FDA is super worried about people dying from a drug. What they don't count often in their analysis is all the people who would have lived if the drug got to market sooner. And there's a lot of criticism about that approach of understanding the world because it's easy to count one group and not the other, so it really biases your perceptions.
Absolutely. Yeah, good. Chris? What do you think of self-driving cars? I heard you had a great experience this past week here in Temecula.
Yeah, actually, I was telling Chad the team out here last time I was out. I got back to the hotel at the end of the day, was tired, didn't feel like going out and grabbing something to eat, so I ordered a Domino's. They're piloting the self-driving car delivery here, and it was just very surreal. You get a text message on your phone. You walk down to the parking lot. They've got a car there with all the vinyl wrap Domino's pizza decorating, and you punch a little code they give you in the text message into the door and open up the car and there's your food and you just take it out and that's it. So real glimpse into the future. It was exciting. Yeah, they don't have anything close to that in Elizabeth, Colorado. So it's a nice treat coming out here and getting to experience something like that.
That is really amazing.
That's really cool. I didn't even know we had it out here, to be honest. But I'm going to order Domino's today now.
Yeah. I think we're all going to be hooked on Domino's for about the next week and a half just to try out the delivery.
Yeah, that's really cool. Chris, do you have any other questions that you want to hit or anything you want to touch on?
I think we hit on a lot of good questions in chat already. I'll just, give it another shameless plug for the course that Luciano's doing. This is one that I'm personally just very geeked out about. Can't wait to sit through as a student and learn. Absolutely fascinated by this intersection of big data and analytics and blockchain. And I don't think a week goes by that I don't end up in a conversation with someone about what that landscape looks like. Is there potential there? What kind of tools are available? So, yeah, I'm just really looking forward to diving in a much longer format into Luciano's brain and learning all the cool stuff he's got to teach us.
I was the first one actually enrolled for that class, oddly enough. So
I'm number 2. I'm right behind you.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to the class, Luciano. I know we have a lot of people very excited. So we look forward to no pressure on you. I know it's going to be a really exciting class for a lot of people. So I appreciate you working with us on it. Do you have anything else that you want to throw out there? Any plugs you need to tell everybody about?
Just a closing word of wisdom, I think, which is that diamonds are always created under a great pressure.
Yeah.
This is important work. We're doing things that are collectively really powerful, and it's pretty amazing to see the community that you have built, Chris, yourself, and then also with Blockchain Training Alliance around this technology. So I'm very excited to be a part of it and very excited for the courses that are going to come, and this is step one of many.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you being a part of it, and we're excited to see what the future holds. And maybe you can find that crystal ball from your uncle and look into it and see where we're at.
Domino's can maybe deliver it with a pizza to my house.
We'll check it out. Absolutely. When you come out here to California, we'll get some Domino's.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks, Luciano.
Thanks, Luciano.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Are you looking to become a certified blockchain solution architect, but you just can't attend one of Blockchain Training Alliance's live 3-day trainings? We have great news for you. Blockchain Solution Architect training is now available on demand. No matter where you are in the world, you can now learn on your own time, at your own pace. This self-paced course is taught by BTA's Chief Learning Officer and lead instructor, Chris Bennett.
Hello and welcome to the Blockchain Training Alliance's course on blockchain architecture. My name is Chris Bennett. I'll be your instructor. Over the coming hours, we're going to start from the very basics of blockchain and walk you through everything you need to know to start identifying good use cases in the world around you and building compelling blockchain solutions.
With 60 days of access, a course study guide, an exam voucher, all included, our on-demand package is all you need to get certified. Enroll today by visiting blockchaintrainingalliance.com.
Hi guys, it's Ken with the Blockchain Training Alliance, and I'm here to tell you about some major developments that we made in Hyperledger Fabric. We've written a lab guide that teaches you how to go from zero to hero using composer development. This teaches you how to write model files, create transaction processors, write permissions files, and also queries. We don't stop there. We teach you how to package up the business network and deploy it to a REST server. And then we teach you how to secure it using OAuth. And at the very end, we tell you to throw everything away, and we give you a capstone project on how to create a business network from scratch. So if you're interested, go ahead and click the button below.